life support for possible organ donation. Hayes has been in a coma for more than a week after she crashed her car into a home in Los Angeles last Friday. Her spokesperson said the actress suffered a severe injury caused by a lack of oxygen to her brain. Police say she had drugs in her system at the time of the crash. Ann Hayes was 53 years old.
This is a time for judgment. Welcome to today's show. I don't normally do videos upon request, but a lot of people have on the website especially have mentioned this thing with Ann Heche, and I've noticed a lot of people have asked me to do a video on it here on YouTube, and I guess it's just another way to hopefully help wake people up so they realize that sacrifice, which is a word that we use in our day-to-day life because it's been implanted into our brains, like we hear celebrities every day, right? Oh, the sacrifice I made. Oh, it's about sacrifice. Well, it's literally about sacrifice, and that's how magic works. They're telling you that everything's about sacrifice. But we think in our heads, we're like, oh, sacrifice means, I'm getting up an hour early and going into work or going into the gym. When these people literally get where they are, and they tell you it's because of sacrifice, but it's really because of human sacrifice. Now, Ann Heche is an actress, if you're not familiar with her. Not that famous, but most known for dating Ellen Degeneres, has been in some movies like Wag the Dog. And when you see these things occur, obviously you could immediately go, well, you could say everybody's a sacrifice, but you have to look for the obvious signs. And there's tons of obvious signs, including coming out of a body bag and sitting up as you're getting wheeled into a fire truck or an ambulance, which I'll show you. I mean, some of the stuff with this is so in our faces and so obvious that it's laughable how sloppy. I mean, this just reminds me of some of the false flags we see our government create all around the country all the time. And people go, well, what do they do? Why do they sacrifice these actors and actresses? Because part of the deal that they make is that when the time comes, and I'll show you this clip here, the time comes, you have to make sacrifices. People are sacrifices for one another. Certain celebrities sacrifice other certain celebrities. That's how this whole thing works. So this is a clip from a movie that I always use. The movie's called The Believers. This is what it's about.
Of course you're uncertain, Cal. Naturally, so was I, till I met him. Now imagine, if you can, a life without uncertainty, freedom from doubt, the ability to choose, single-mindedness. One life from each of us, Cal, is all he asks, and he rewards our devotion 1,000-fold. Personal desires, oh yes, of course, I mean, that's part of it. It's only the beginning. There was a time, Cal, when man was at one with the gods before the fall. Now we're at one again. And their benediction is power. It's a power you can't imagine. Power to create a world of our choosing. Power to destroy those who oppose us. I want you to join us. Kite this ground with this Father's humble offering. You seek the strength and wisdom of our benefactors.
We call upon the ancient gods to renew our strength and guide your hand to strike down the enemies of our faith and of this great nation.
We welcome our brother Cal, reborn into your grace.
Ayawaladama,
Which is our birthright,
Erabanya,
glory, which is our destiny.
Anjuka Jintasmala,
Our enemies consumed by winds of fire.
Kung Pangay Mululaksonina.
Strength, reborn, sacrifice.
Dinti, Sonina. Monsaya Dinti, Sonina.
Okay, so let's take a look at some of the stuff with Ann Heche here. Now, interestingly enough, if you look into the history of her, you have common themes that we always see with Satanists and the occult. Ann Heche, abused as a child by her father. Usually when this happens, and I'm not saying 100% of the time, but I would say 90% of the time, The parents are usually in covens or cults, and they push this abuse onto children, and then it's a vicious cycle that never ends. That's how they've taken over so much, is that so many of these people in Hollywood have been abused as children, and then they become the abusers. Some people feel sorry for them because they're like, well, they were abused, but at the same time, it's like, well, they could stop the vicious cycle and come out and, expose what this really is, but they don't most of the time, and sometimes when they try to, they have malfunction. So Anne Heche was abused by her father as a child. We don't know if it's definitely satanic ritual abuse, but it reeks of it because she became a famous actress. Okay? All these people in Hollywood we obviously know are involved in the occult. Another thing that's very bizarre about this is that she died via, supposedly, of course, crashing her car, which I'll show you now, which is probably one of the most ridiculous clips you're ever going to see. I mean, really, this is like WWE type of stuff. Her brother died at a young age via the same death. He crashed a car into a tree and died when the family was living in New Jersey. So very similar, and remember how the occult operates. These rituals always seem to have significant meaning behind them. But here is Anne Heche. Okay, let's start with this. Her book cover for her book that she wrote, you can see her doing all-seeing eyes symbolism right on the cover. Don't call me crazy, or call me crazy, excuse me. Or she's holding the hand over the eye, blatant all-seeing eyes symbolism. They always do the all-seeing eyes symbolism. You can pretty much every single celebrity, you'll find them on a magazine cover, a book cover, doing this. Now, this isn't like, people are like, well, put their hand over their eye. Well, no one's catching her, getting a mosquito or a fly out of her eye. This is her book cover. So clearly, they take these photographs, they specifically want these pictures on magazine covers and on book covers, et cetera, et cetera. You can catch a guy doing something and it wouldn't be on purpose. Like I always say, if you watch baseball, if there's 2 outs, a lot of the guys hold up the devil horn, but they're not holding up the devil horns, they're holding up the number 2 to say there's 2 outs. So that's a little bit different. But when you're strategically placing it on covers like this, and she shows it all over her Instagram account, where she's doing all-seeing eye symbolism, which tells you she's one of them. And then if you look into the stuff she pushes and believes, like all the Hollywood loons, you obviously know that she's a witch, just like the rest of them. Now, let's look into, as we see, of course, her too with the black and white Masonic checkerboard. I wouldn't be surprised if she's Job's daughter, Rainbow Girl, and then initiated into Eastern Star Masonry. She was starring in a film coming out, of course, about human trafficking, so there's another connection there. Now, this wasn't about satanic ritual abuse, so I would say this is her doing her part, because, of course, these people will never expose Satanism. They pretend that human trafficking is happening from like people like me and you. Next door neighbor wants to make a couple $1,000s, so he kidnaps somebody and sells them. That's not how trafficking really works. The occult literally birth people in these covens. They birth children and use them specifically for trafficking. It's the biggest business in the world, bigger than drug trade, because they sell, children to one another, to other, people who are in these secret societies for exorbitant amounts of money you couldn't even fathom. And I've talked about over the years that they launder and use art shows and art galleries as fronts, places where you could put any price possible on an object. That way you can get away with, doing this stuff, and that's what they've set this whole world has been set up to be for them. That's how they're getting away with all this stuff, or have gotten away with it, but they won't be getting away with it for much longer. So here's the clip, okay, of Anne Heche she drives her car into a tree. This is the actual news clip, and you can see her on a gurney literally come out of a body bag. They're telling us that she's brain dead, but she sits up almost as if they threw her in the body bag. And you might say about the car crash, like this erratic driving. Okay, well, this erratic driving, it can clearly be controlled because they have the ability to take control of cars. These smart cars, a lot of the cars, most of the cars, unless they're like, depending on what year the car is from, any cars that are current, they have the ability to hijack with the technology that they have. They can literally chime in, just zap themselves into the computer base of that car and do what they want. So this erratic driving, which makes no sense, and somebody who, of course, she was buying a wig or something like that beforehand. I'll show you that interview clip as well. So let's take a look at her sitting up on the gurney and notice the ambulance or the fire truck with the number 36. How convenient. Usually those are the numbers you'll see. 33 or you see 36 as in 666, 3 6s. Here she is sitting up, literally coming out of a body bag, WWE style.
Bobby and Marla, it was amazing what happened out here. LA City Fire Department, I got to give it to them right off the bat. The men and women from this fire department, some of the most amazing. Vehicle into a structure, then that car catches fire. And when we say into a structure, I mean all the way in, almost coming out the other side. This house out here on Walgrove, right at the cross of Brookhaven, at Preston, you can see that T intersection. The best we can figure, that vehicle was on this street and made its way across, not stopping ever, through those hedges, through the front door, or through that front wall of this home, and lodged itself almost in the back. Then it caught fire. LA City Fire Department arriving here very quickly. They had this home with fire and knowing there was a vehicle inside there. Firefighters making an attack on that fire. Other firefighters trying to get into that building to get that driver out of that car. While all this was going on, they couldn't get to that car. They actually had to call in heavy rescue. That's what you see right there. They hooked up cables to that car, pulled it out. It's actually in that driveway. And then the driver, well, LA City Fire Department, their paramedics pulled that driver from that vehicle. We have tape of that, and then basically had him on a gurney. We weren't sure what the situation was there on his condition, but then as he made his way over to the ambulance, you see it right there. He jumps up out of that gurney. It was horrific, scary for a moment for everybody watching. And then the fire department, well, they had to sedate him and take him to the hospital. Right now, though, the structure is still standing. No other victims inside that home. But again, this happening out here in Palms this afternoon. Crazy thing to see for sure. But again, that no other injuries, and that driver now in the hospital. I'm Stu up in Skyfox. Back to you guys in the studio.
I don't. So, they're airing this, and they're, like, telling this story. And nobody's like, she's sitting up out of the body bag. It's like, did anyone notice she's sitting up out of the body bag there? And then they're telling us she has brain trauma, and that she's not going to survive the brain injuries. And eventually, of course, she passes away. I wonder how. I wonder where they really took her, right? What hospital was she actually in, or what ritual was performed on her? So they told you right after this that she wasn't expected to survive the brain injury, probably because she was already long gone at that point, a few days after this. Probably every single limb was probably taken off and eaten by these people, because that's what they do. That's how sick they are. And they tell you it's just some type of brain injury when all the oxygen is cut off from the brain, etc., etc. But you don't hear any stories on the news. They're talking about her all over the news, but nobody's like, hey, did you notice she sat up in a body bag? Why would you be in the body bag in the first place? You wouldn't be in a body bag in the first place, because if you had any kind of a pulse, they wouldn't put you in a freaking body bag, okay? When somebody dies, you make sure the person's dead. And usually, like, if somebody dies at home or something like that, like, you wait, the funeral parlor person comes, etc., hours go by. You don't just grab somebody all out of a crime scene. Especially, there's like, clearly she's barely wounded. Like, you don't see blood all over the place. You just see them throw her in a body bag. They probably punched her in the face or whatever when they went over to the car, because she was still conscious and they wanted to get her into the body bag. So she sits up in the body bag. Then you have the interview with the hairstylist guy or whatever. She was wig shopping, and he said she's in a great mood. Just right, like literally minutes before this occurred.
We're learning more details about the moments leading up to Friday's fiery crash involving actress Anne Heche. New surveillance video shows Heche barreling through an alleyway, nearly hitting a pedestrian. A business owner in Venice also telling us the actress visited his store moments before the crash. Richard Glass says Heche was shopping for a wig and acting like, quote, a sweet little girl.
I was just so taken aback, and I was like, what happened? Because she didn't, like I said, she didn't seem impaired to me.
Heche was seen speeding and driving erratically through surface streets. She's believed to have been behind the wheel for at least one hit and run when the actress slammed into a garage. The dangerous ride came to an end when she smashed her car into a home in LA's Mar Vista neighborhood. That violent collision sparked a fire. The LAPD has served a warrant for a blood sample. They suspect she may have been under the influence. A representative for Heche says she remains in a coma and has not regained consciousness.
So she's in a great mood, but, of course, they come out. All they have to do is say mental health problems and addiction, right? Because they can just use those as free passes to do whatever they want. So they do rituals out in the open. Now, why was she chosen? I don't know. Why are any of these people chosen? When their time comes, their time comes. Sometimes they're asked to do something and they don't do it. Sometimes they don't give enough back to the brotherhood or the sisterhood, whatever you want to call it, in her case. And their time comes. You know, Robin Williams, I mean, we've seen all these people over the years with these mysterious deaths that make no sense, and then they just come out and they say, oh, they were severely depressed. Oh, were they? Floating around with millions of dollars, could go wherever they want, don't have to live by the same rules that the rest of us live by. Yeah, and they're all just offing themselves. And some people are like, well, they started to get guilty of the lives that they live. Doubtful, because most of these people always go in a sacrifice. Even if the person is like 80 or 90 years old, and they're dying of cancer or something like that, they usually will just do a ritual where they're allowed to allowing themselves to be offered as a sacrifice to Satan. So instead of like dying in their bed, we'll hear like, oh, so-and-so died at 90 in their bed. They'll usually perform the ritual because they'll offer themselves up and they'll do a huge ritual for the person. So in this case, you can look at it and you say, well, maybe she was going to come out and say some stuff. I mean, there's always things that people think of. I have no idea, so there's no need to speculate. But you could clearly see, just from looking at this stuff, it's bizarre. I mean, you might not believe in any of this stuff, but how do you look at it and say, this is normal? Oh, her brain suddenly worked for a second. Oxygen flew in her brain, so she sat up. She unzipped herself out of a body bag. You ever been in a body bag? I mean, I haven't, but I'm pretty familiar that it's like super hard to get out of a body bag, right? Like the zipper on it, and she somehow pops out of the thing. She shouldn't even have been in the first place. And you can look at the erratic driving. I mean, it looks like somebody had full control of her car. Easy way to do these types of rituals, right? Another thing that they want with 5G, like full control of people's cars, because they want full control over everyone. They want to be able to do whatever they want to anyone at any time. And our society is enabling them to be able to do those things. So you saw the video clip in the beginning with the ritual. That's really, how the occult operates. In these rituals, they are asked to offer things up, even their own children. Most of the time, these people are always connected and surrounded by death. And Hesh, whatever, is another example. Multiple family members dead. Father was an abuser, right? Same story. When the narrative is always very similar. It's like, how many people know somebody who was abused as a kid? I'm sure everybody might know a person or two, maybe. I don't know anybody personally, other than people who have reached out to me, with my channel, who have been victims of SRA. But I don't know anybody whose like parents are doing any of that stuff. And again, a lot of people don't come forward, so that's understandable. But it just seems like every person in Hollywood has some story like this. They're like, oh, they're abused as a kid. Like, isn't Oprah another one? I mean, I've done so many videos on these people, and it's always this theme. Always. And they get the sympathy for it, which is understandable, but at the same time, it's like they're telling you what they're a part of. Because all of these people in covens, these Satanists who organize and do these things, they all groom and breed these children. And then these children, unfortunately, become that. Miley Cyrus is a perfect example, of what she went through. And then if you look at Miley Cyrus and all the stuff that she posts, I mean, you could clearly see she's a groomer and a handler. She's sick beyond belief. Beyond belief. Most of them all are. It's because they're under possession, and these people are they're running amok in our society. So, Anne Hayes, you could decide for yourself if it looks like a ritual sacrifice. I mean, it certainly doesn't look normal, Like, I can't recall, someone's going to a store, they're like, yeah, the person seemed perfectly fine. Like, maybe they'd be like, yeah, she was slurring, so maybe she was drunk or something, or on some medication. And everything seemed fine, and then they just decide they're going to drive down alleyways going 90 miles per hour. And then, of course, sit up in the body bags. I mean, look, when they tell you it's time, it's time. And that's the oath that these people all take. They know what they're getting into when they sign their deal. So, I don't feel sympathy for the devil. I don't feel sympathy for any of these people for what they get involved in, because they still have free will at the end of the day, and they still can turn to Jesus Christ. They have their whole lives to do it, and some of them are still out there. Some of them even listen to my channel or other channels like it, and they still have a chance to be saved through the blood of Jesus Christ, who died for our salvation. And they can turn away from this nonsense, but most of them never, ever do. But hopefully people out there listening, they can see this stuff and realize this is how the occult's always operated. You can look back at ancient cultures, et cetera, human sacrifice. That's the key. I talk about it all the time. Right? They come out with articles in the New York Times. Oh, human sacrifice is the hierarchy for our government. Oh, did you know human sacrifice? All these cultures that they tell us like we should look at, like the Aztec, all these things that we look back on. They're like, wow, did you know cannibalism and human sacrifice was a big part of it? Oh, what do you think? They just abandoned it? And when people look back, like, oh, that's strange. Well, what do you think they did it for? Because they gained magical powers and all this other crap. And they've done it. It goes back to the Old Testament, Baal worship. So it still occurs. It's just that we have this simulation that we're living in now where we don't see these things because we're living in this reality that they've created, which is just hunky-dory fantasy land. But this stuff is still occurring, and it's occurring right in front of our faces. And they love showing it to us because it enhances the power of their spell and their craft. That's what these people believe in. And don't think for 1 second that they don't, because they do. And that's why they constantly do it over and over again, even if they know that people like me and you can see them. I thank everyone for being here. I hope we're all doing well. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. God bless all of you and your families.